CityLax Dialogues, breaking down walls, one ground ball at a time. I'm Eamon McAnaney, board member of CityLax. I'll be your moderator tonight, but we have an excellent panel here to discuss race relations in the sport of lacrosse, how it can improve, and what it has been like to play this sport as a minority. We have a lot of panelists to get to, but first, for those of you who are new to CityLax, CityLax is an organization based in New York City that was created back in 2005. Its number one goal was to create lacrosse programs in New York City public schools, high schools, and now at the middle school level, but it does much more than just create lacrosse teams. It is also motivated to improve off the field resources for the New York City public schools, such as tutoring, mentoring, and now with a new initiative with My Position A, it is doing a work with the high school students as far as college placement goes. So while we are creating lacrosse programs all across New York City and putting sticks in hands, we're also helping educate people and motivate young students so that they can keep their grades up, graduate from high school, and go to college, whether lacrosse is part of their college plans or not. Now, tonight here, obviously, the discussion is about race and lacrosse, and we are going to get to our panelists in a minute. Right now, I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Nigel Andrews, a recent graduate of Harvard University. Nigel grew up in New York City, product of the Docs and CityLax program. Nigel and his family were honorees this spring of CityLax for their contributions to the organization, but also to the sport on and off the field. Like so many of his classmates, Nigel had his lacrosse season cut short and has been adopted as a board member, it seems, here at CityLax. So we thank him for all his efforts. And now, Nigel, I'd like to turn this over to you for a few words.
Yeah, so Eamon did a great job of kind of giving the overview of CityLax's mission. So as everybody knows, we're in the middle of a pandemic. So all of the Division I teams had their seasons cut short. So we thought it would be a great idea to create an event called the CityLax Senior Classic, where which is going to be held this fall somewhere in the New York City area, most likely on Randall's Island, which is going to give those seniors who had their seasons cut short due to the COVID-19 pandemic one last chance to get on the field with their friends, teammates, and opponents while raising money for CityLax and their mission. So the event is scheduled for September 12th, and if you're interested in signing up, there's a registration link on the CityLax website, which you can find at citylax.org. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Eamon.
All right. Job as we go on through the night, and we have, certainly conversation will be sparked by what we hear from our panelists. So if you have for any of our panelists, send it to us time so we can have some Q&A virtually here. But now let's get stars of the night. Our Jules Heningburg, a product of Rutgers and Seton Hall Prep in New Jersey, now a professional player for the Redwoods of the Premier Lacrosse League. Last week, he penned a powerful and moving column and video to US Lacrosse Magazine. I'm sure many of you, if not all of you, have seen that by now. Jules Heningburg here with us. Also with us is Rutgers teammate Chad Toliver from Atlanta, Georgia. He also played professionally with the Atlanta Blaze. Brittany Brown, a former All-Ivy goalie at Penn, a product of New York City, also played at Docs growing up, played at Riverdale in high school as well before moving on to the Ivy League, where she helped lead the Quakers to so much success as an All-Ivy goalie. And Carter Henry, out of the McCallie School in Tennessee. He's a incoming freshman, going not to the Ivy League and to the Ivy League, and his future head Shea have joined us on the Zoom as well. So I'd like to virtually welcome Jules, Britt, Chad, and Carter. Thank you so much for giving us your time here and helping spread the word of CityLax, but more importantly,
some of them are
more importantly, obviously discussing Jonathan Mevs as well has joined. Jules, let's start with you.
Like, this is like the closest Daddy has been to like live TV in
US Lacrosse
a very long
Magazine.
time. The close you'll think it's hilarious. 259.
Obviously, we all know what happened. But what moved you to put pen to paper and take your story public?
And your
he
does it on Zoom. It took like 4 of us the
experiences in the
first time
sport
to
of
set up all
lacrosse
this lighting.
public. Why was that so important to you?
Absolutely. I'll just start off. Someone needs to
that was
mute
the
their
first
mic,
one.
please, everyone.
That was the first, like,
so we
that
can
was like one of the
hear each other.
advertisements of like, we're all doing our best. And then now he does like
Eamon,
weekly hits.
Sorry to interrupt. Eamon, it's Matt. I think we have to announce to everybody tuned in that everybody's got to go on mute.
I think we're good. We good
Actually,
now?
with such a large Zoom call, we're going to have some technical difficulties. So as you heard Matt say, I think we need everyone on mute other than our panelists. So please, if you're not muted yet, please click the bottom left screen of the microphone so that you're on mute. And I apologize for the technical difficulties. I'll go back to my first question to Jules. Important for you to put pen to paper and contact US Lacrosse Magazine and put the video out and then write the column so that everyone knew more about your experiences growing up in the sport of lacrosse?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Eamon, for the introduction with everyone. And I just want to say I'm really appreciative for CityLax for putting this event on. I know how important of a time this is for us to really speak to these things. And for me personally, obviously, I did put that video out and I put pen to paper with everything that was going on. And it went out to the public, and I know that it caught a lot of attention within the lacrosse community. And I know that now we're able to have more of these conversations, which is great. But I think kind of one of the points I want to make in all of this is like the reason that I was able to do that and really take that step to put my story out there to the public was because of the individuals that, you know, I felt so strongly about that were really my family in a lot of ways, both internally in my immediate family and my brothers in the game. That I've been, you know, fortunate enough to get so close to, one of them being on the call right now, Chad, another one being John Mevs, just young men in the community that I've grown up with and played with for so long. And we've spoken about these things and these issues for so many years. And it really was just kind of a culmination of the timing for me to kind of be able to step into the light a little bit and talk about my story. But it's something I've always done really my whole life, was be able to just talk about these issues in a way that, you know, maybe someone who's a little bit darker than me doesn't really have that privilege because people kind of look at them differently. And a lot of people didn't look at me the same way in the sport and in my growing up my entire life. And it kind of just gave me a different perspective. And it gave me a lot of privilege as well. So I knew that it was a situation where I knew that I had a voice in the game to a certain extent, and that if I could share really the empathy that I was feeling in my heart for both my family and like I said, my brothers in the game, I felt like that was really a responsibility for me to do that. And that's kind of what my motivation and my courage was, to both make the video and put it down on paper. And that's kind of where we are now. And I think, you know, as we continue to have these conversations, it's important to remember, you know, for me at least, where my voice came from was a place of empathy, knowing the history of Black people in the United States, knowing the experiences of my brothers in the game, knowing that, you know, to a certain extent, right, for me at least, a lot of the times I had my own experiences, but the color of my skin was defining that differently than my darker brothers and sisters. And that was important for me to speak to that and make that known, that I knew that and I recognized that, and that if I was going to speak up about it because it was important to me, I hoped other people would as well. And that's kind of why we're on this call right now.
That outreach on social media touched so many and impacted so many. Britt, I mentioned you're a product of New York City. You went from Docks all the way to the Ivy League. What experiences would you like to share with us about being a minority in the sport of lacrosse and how you handled them?
So I would say one of the biggest things I found is finding an ally, finding someone that can listen to you when you're angry or where you're upset about a situation, and then finding a way to then turn those emotions into applicable solutions. So for me, I had a personal experience when I was at Penn where my differences in life didn't fully align with some teammates and how they interpreted certain things. And I had to find a way to deal with all that anger at the same time, fight for an Ivy League championship, fight to get to the NCAA tournament. And for me, it was a really good realization to also sit and listen to other folks to see, okay, this is how I'm feeling. They actually don't understand what it's like to walk in my shoes. They don't understand fully what it's like to be the only Black person to step onto the field, and see a majority of your peers, since the sport does tend to lend, unfortunately right now, to a majority of individuals that do come from an affluent background, that maybe I did struggle buying a stick. Maybe I did, struggle making sure that I had new cleats every season. And those struggles sometimes were not fully understood by my peers. So finding a way to find allies and finding a way to have that discussion was really important to me. And that's why I'm so happy to be here, is to have that conversation between teammates and between coaches. So when we step onto the field, everyone understands what everyone's going through as much as they possibly can.
Pick up that part of the conversation with you. You mentioned, Britt mentioned having allies. What was that like for you at Rutgers with Jules as a teammate? Coming to a new state. I mean, Jules was a New Jersey product, so he probably, knew non-players at Rutgers as well. What was it like for you to go to a brand new state, new school, and be a part of that team, and to need sort of lean on other teammates as allies?
Is that for Chad, that question?
Chad, sorry.
Yep. Chad, you there?
He's muted, I think.
Yeah, can we unmute Chad?
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Did you hear my
All right,
question?
good. Yeah. I know. I heard your question. I was just on mute.
Okay,
Sorry about that. Yeah. So it was interesting. Jules, I think wholeheartedly could tell you. I had to deal with a lot of stuff, and I think it's something that I had to learn early, is that people fear what they don't know. And a lot of people didn't really understand me. And a lot of people, this was, their first time being in a locker room with an African-American or African-American teammate or whatever it is. And it was just sometimes uncomfortable for them. And so when I came in with Jules's dad took me under his wing. I was able to ask him a lot of questions, and he kind of gave me the history of his family. And it kind of right off the bat, I knew right then and there if I had any issues that I knew I was going to run into, because obviously lacrosse being a predominantly white sport, you're going to run into issues. Everyone's not cut from the same cloth that you're going to be cut from. And that was something I had to kind of learn the hard way. But like I said, I would have these conversations with Jules. And I would have conversations with a couple other guys in the locker room, and sometimes there was issues that did happen, and there were some guys who were quiet about the situation, and then there were some guys who spoke up and kind of had my back. So obviously, I mean, this is long overdue, and I'm so glad that we're having this meeting, because I'm sure so many of you guys, if you guys go to college or whatever it is, or even the corporate world, you're going to run into those issues. And I'm glad 310 people are on this call to kind of make a difference and kind of help those who will run into that issue. And so, like I said, I think what Britt said earlier is, having an ally and having someone to talk to, and understanding that it's not going to be comfortable all the time, but just doing the right thing will make you and help you sleep better at night when you put your head on your pillow. So it was definitely interesting, Eamon.
Can imagine. Nigel, let's bring you back in here, because like Britt, you're a product of New York City. You grew up in Manhattan back before lacrosse had really, I don't know if you could even say now it's taken off, but certainly was less popular back then. What drew you to lacrosse, and what role has it played for you moving on, to Deerfield, Harvard, and now obviously a graduate of Harvard?
Yeah, so I started playing lacrosse in third grade. Before third grade, I had no idea what lacrosse was. I was kind of playing the typical American sports like soccer, basketball, football. Then one day, my uncle took me to a semifinals game, UVA versus Hopkins, and I think it was like 2006 or something. And I remember watching the game and seeing this black guy at Hopkins just dominating people. And that was of course Kyle Harrison. And I saw him, and I immediately told my dad, I was like, I want to do that one day, and I want to be that guy one day. And that kind of jump-started my career in lacrosse. And like you said, I played with Docs up until 8th grade. Then I went on to Deerfield, played there for 4 years. And then I was fortunate enough to play at Harvard for another 4 years. And I'd say, looking back on my experience, I would definitely say that when I was younger, I was very non-confrontational, and I was afraid of making myself uncomfortable. and being uncomfortable and having those uncomfortable conversations. So when people would say things to me like, "Oh, you're the whitest black guy I've ever known," or you're good at lacrosse just because you're a good athlete. Like those things would hurt me and make me feel upset and mad, but because I was afraid to confront them and be vulnerable and kind of just be uncomfortable, I never said anything about it, kind of let it just happen and brushed it under the rug. But I would say my sophomore year of high school, I started to realize that I had to kind of change my ways and be uncomfortable, and it was okay to be uncomfortable and have those conversations and confront people when people said things that upset me. And so when I got to college, I made it a concerted effort to kind of bring my friends in and have a conversation my freshman year with them and kind of explain to them how my experience is different from theirs. And the people I talked to who were my closest friends were all white guys who came from white communities and grew up surrounded by white people and didn't have that much interaction with black and people other than white people. So their whole experience and the lens that they saw the world was definitely very different from mine. And sometimes it blinded them from the things that I was experiencing on a day-to-day basis. So just having that conversation and although it was uncomfortable at the beginning, just having it definitely allowed them to kind of see my perspective and kind of get a deeper understanding of how I feel playing lacrosse in a predominantly white sport and how I viewed my experience on the team. And so through those conversations and being uncomfortable and being vulnerable, I was able to gain allies, as everybody's been saying, and gain people who I knew had my back and had a better understanding of what I was going through. And so I'm hoping my experience and everybody else's experience will help younger kids who are also feeling similar ways that I did when I was younger and feeling that, feeling uncomfortable speaking up to people when they say stuff that upsets them and angers them. I'm hoping this call kind of encourages and empowers these kids to stand up, find allies, and say no more to people doing that stuff.
Perfect segue to bring Carter Henry into the conversation. So Carter, if you could unmute yourself here. You just graduated high school and are moving on to Yale. And I think two of the common themes that we've heard in this call, but also what we've read the last week is that often, obviously, minorities are the only minorities on their team. When you go to college, that you're the only African American on the team. But also, on the flip side, that's the first time many of these white players have had a African American teammate or a minority teammate. As Nigel pointed out, a lot of lacrosse players, it is what it is, grow up in predominantly white areas. So Carter, I'm curious what it's been like for you so far, not only at your school, but obviously you go to showcases outside your neighborhood. How do you break the ice when all of a sudden your teammate at a showcase is not only an unknown, but he has probably never had an African American teammate before? What was that experience like for you going through the recruiting process and playing in high school?
I mean that's a really good question. For me, it was different for me just because I live in the South. So people there was the school that I went to, Macaulay. We had an African American coach. So he sort of taught me, along with other African American players, how to break the ice with people that don't look like you. Because the reality is, being black in a predominantly white sport, people are always going to look at you differently just because you're the minority. So I think it was making it a point to just start having conversation with my white teammates or whoever it was, and just making them realize that I'm not much different than you, even though I'm a different color than you or whatever. We really have had mostly the same experiences, and going to the showcases and whatever. It's just a matter of trying to have talks and trying to learn who they are as a person and where their family is and things like that, that'll just make someone more comfortable with you. So I think that was my biggest thing with the whole recruiting process and with school and showcases and everything like that.
Obviously, a common topic already here in this brief conversation has been about building allies on your team. And we have a question from the audience from Charlie Myran. And Jonathan, I'm going to let you answer this question because since you've been around the sport for a while. What was something a coach did to facilitate allyship among the team? What do you wish they had done better? So, Jonathan, we'll start that out with you, and then everyone else could jump in. But what do you think, what in your experience, a coach has done to, sort of produce allyship among the team, and what do you wish they had done better?
Yeah, so again, just want to thank CityLax for putting this together. Definitely an important conversation that we need to be having. So like Jules could tell you, luckily enough for us, like growing up with youth lacrosse, if you could see with that picture, my team was actually pretty diverse, and it was a small knit community, and like we had Black coaches, so a lot of the allyship was built off the field, I would have to say. After middle school, like even though we didn't have like planned youth practice, there was always the push for like just getting together, and we had cages right by our middle school. So just being out there, shooting around with other neighborhood kids was really great. And then at the higher level in high school, there was always like, after Saturday practices, just like stuff that you were doing with your teammates, like off the field. So what could they have done better? Probably just being like more deliberate. Like a lot of the activities were still like physical because like you're trying to be like just as in shape as possible just so you can compete on the field. So maybe if there was more just like, mindfulness activities or just like team building sort of stuff and conversations would be definitely something better so that deeper bonds could be formed.
Nigel discussed, going to see Kyle Harrison play. Carter, as you've grown up, the game of lacrosse has received more exposure. Was that something that impacted you, having a chance maybe to see the Brattons at Virginia or Miles Jones at Duke? What kind of an impact did the exposure that Black players received on ESPNU or other cable channels, what impact did that have on you, on drawing you to the sport?
I would say it definitely had a pretty big impact on me, just because like so I remember the first college lacrosse game I went to was at Kennesaw State, where Duke, I want to say they played Denver, and Miles Jones was playing there, and then after the game, like I got a picture with him, and it was and like even though at that time I was pretty young, like I always knew that I wanted to be, or I always wanted to try to be a Miles Jones for someone that's looking up to me, just like I looked up to Miles Jones, and even now, like he and I are pretty close, and we talk a lot and we train and all that stuff. Like it was really because of him. That was the reason why I took lacrosse a lot more serious, and I wanted to be a role model for someone younger than me.
Britt, let's go back to a topic that we were just discussing recently about what coaches can do, because we have another question from a viewer about what initiatives are taking place and what the coaches, who are obviously mainly white, what they can do to create equity and inclusion so that maybe those allies are already developed. So sort of, I'm going to ask you a two-parter, and we can go around the horn with this one as well. What experience do you have, Britt, from your playing days of what coaches and teammates can build that allyship, and what should they know going forward to, sort of build it earlier in the process?
So I think first is one, understanding that not everyone has the answers. Like my Black experience is not the same as Carter's, is not the same as Nigel's. And if you can get to that separation, then you can understand that asking the question and being comfortable with being wrong is going to be so much more important than assuming something. So, for example, I went through a situation at Penn where my teammates unfortunately assumed something, which then caused me to sort of be kind of like unaware of a situation going on due to my financial state. And for me, that was really harmful that no one wanted to have the question. No one wanted to talk to me about it. And that was really frustrating for me because, you know, we go through these run tests, right? We are lifting so hard in the weight room. And I would do anything for them. And then to not have the discussion of, you know, affording something X, Y, and Z was very frustrating to me and hurtful. And so for me, I went through a situation where I had to learn how to use my emotions and turn those emotions into an actual conversation and a solution rather than just confrontation and just taking out my anger on individuals and not allowing them to have a discussion. And one thing that I, and to this day, will ever be thankful for my coaches is that they allow that avenue of dialogue. They explain to me that they will never understand the pain that I'm in, but they are willing to get as close as they can to understand. And that they brought all of us to the table to try and get that dialogue going, to then mend the bridges, start moving on, and continuing to have that discussion to make sure that it never happens again. And so what I would say to younger players out there is, you know, everyone's going to react to situations differently. There's going to be anger. There's going to be sadness. You know, there's going to be tears, and it hurts. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's hard being out on the field and only seeing one individual that looks like you. But there is one thing that I can say is that when you open up that conversation, I have only seen it turn out to be a positive situation. And so for coaches to be there, listening to their players, trying to understand their players' backgrounds of where they're coming from, and understand that the anger of that one situation might be a culmination of many situations where they have been fighting on the field to show that they deserve to be there just as much as anyone else. And they're not just better than someone because they're Black, or they didn't just get the spot because they're a minority and it looked great for the team, but that they fully deserve to be there just like the rest of their teammates is very, very important. So I think getting to know players off the field and their background is so important. And then having that uncomfortable conversation in the locker room and getting to know about each other's families and their experiences is the way to go on this, rather than just ignoring it and not saying anything. Because I do believe that there is more dialogue and there's more individuals like the panelists say that are willing to discuss it, willing to help coaches through having those discussions. Then we're going to see a lot more diverse field than we do right now. And I know there's a parent that asked, you know, a question about racism in lacrosse. And just going back to this question, I totally understand that, you know, your son might be 11 or however old, but shouldering the burden is something that I actually believe that we can actually turn to the positive here. And having those discussions and having to fight through it on the field is only going to help you later on in your life. Whereas for me right now, I'm trading mortgage-backed securities and I'm the only Black female trader in my entire group. There's like 65 of us. And so there's no way I would be able to stand in a room and fight for a raise or stand in a room and fight for a promotion if I didn't have to show that fight on the field and didn't have to educate people on the field on these situations. And I know the education can sometimes be tiring and you need to take time for yourself, but having that conversation and finding those individuals to have that conversation is so, so important.
A question from a viewer here, and this question right in the wheelhouse for Carter Henry, who just finished the process and is on his way to Yale. But the question is, what advice can you give to a CityLax middle school or high school player to help them get visibility in the college recruiting process? It's an expensive process. Are there sources of funding? So Carter, just what's it like to sort of get exposure and be seen? How difficult is that? I mean, obviously you're obviously had, you know, even more obstacles playing in Tennessee, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely hard for me, but I also, again, had allies and coaches and coaches around the country, high school coaches around the country. Like my high school coach, Coach Kemp, he's always been super close with like most of the college lacrosse coaches. Like actually when I was getting recruited by like Duke and Yale and whoever else, I remember I was so stressed out about like during the fall and of my junior year and like my sophomore year summer, and he just pulled me aside and he was like, I know it's hard and I know it's this, that, or whatever, but I promise you that we're going to make it work. And he told me that when I was a freshman. So I would say, you know, always keep your skills up and always, you know, try to put yourself out there on the field. But also I would say trying to find a coach or someone that can advocate for you in the recruiting landscape is really big. And it's a big help for sure.
Matt Levine here. For those of you who don't know, Matt is the CEO, helped found CityLax back in 2005. He has been the driving force behind the organization, which has helped create so many high school programs across New York City. And I think those of us who often talk about grow the game, you know, we think about, you know, the next Miles Jones or the next Kyle Harrison, but Matt knows that it's about more than that. You know, it's about motivating every student to keep their grades up and keep going to class, even though they may never play in college. They get a high school diploma and get to go to college. And if it was developing a passion for lacrosse, it never have happened. So Matt, you know, through the 15 years that CityLax has been creating public school high school programs in probably the most diverse country, how have you found this sport bringing young ones together and, you know, creating and helping to grow that diversity that the sport obviously needs?
I mean, it's been a pleasure and a challenge to bring the game to New York City student athletes, especially those underserved and in the public schools. And first, to try to get a partnership with the schools and credibility with them, that you have something that they think is valuable to their student athletes, not only as a sport, but as a path forward, was very important. The challenges are really, you know, it's almost by definition, when you try to get kids in a New York City public school together, there are many different races, colors, ethnic groups that the average coach is putting together. And coaches, it's been great because the sport, I think, is different and unique to the urban athlete, especially in the public schools. And I think that those that want to give it a try, just as a game of skill, athleticism, and something that's different than their peers, has been a big attraction. When they hear us and our coaches, their high school coaches and our CityLax volunteers talk to them about really the game is winning and losing, but it's really about bringing what you learn out here back to the classroom. I think kids all of a sudden start to get the message that this could be a pathway for them, maybe not to get a scholarship like many of our athletes on the call have done, but an entry point to a school if they stick to their grades and stick to their focus and that they want to graduate on time, and they want to get to the best college opportunity possible. I think that's the message that has really motivated the kids that we've been successful with.
Jules back in, because obviously as we started this with Jules's column and video that really sparked a lot of conversation in the lacrosse world. And I don't think we'd be doing this call the proper service if we didn't now spin it forward. Jules, this is an incredible forum now for you. There's so many players of so many different levels, but also coaches Ivy League coaches are on the call. I'm sure they're not the only college coaches. High school coaches are on this call as well. Have their ear. What should they know? I don't know necessarily know do it differently because we don't know how everyone does it, but what should they know about, how to grow the game and, how to build those allies within a locker room so that there isn't that sort of isolation that we're getting the idea so many African Americans feel in the sport. Here's your form. You have some of the best coaches in the game listening and some up and coming players. What should we all know moving forward about how to bridge the gap here in the sport of lacrosse?
Yeah, appreciate that, Eamon. I think kind of just going back to really the start of my conversation is where did I come from in all this? Because I think it's important to know, like, one of the reasons I was able to, start the conversation, frankly, was because of the color of my skin. I think that allowed for people to see me in a different way and not really know who I was. And I think that, like, that speaks to what I was feeling in my heart at the end of the day was empathy, no matter what my skin color was, to my brothers and sisters in the game. And I think that everything starts with that, both as a coach and a player. And I think that, as we look across the game, it's exciting to see so many of the kids on here with CityLax and so many people that want to be a part of this. But at the end of the day, like, the demographics of our sport, it's majority white. And I think that puts, perhaps a lot of the CityLax players on here in the minority group. And I think it's important to acknowledge that and recognize, when players are, coming from certain areas, both the minority players and both the players that are coming from other communities, mainly white communities, right? It becomes a situation where it's you don't know the guy over there and I don't know the guy over there. And we have to start to bridge that gap and start to just think about more how to be empathetic to people's experiences, both as a coach and also a teammate in the locker room. And I think that's something I recognize as a very young person. When I'd go through my experience, a lot of the times people would see me and not know who I was or what I was. A lot of my black friends used to look at me and, I'd get called, I was the white boy, I was this, I was that. And then once they realized that stuff didn't matter to me, I didn't care about the color of your skin because I was black, right? Then our dialogue started to change. And I think it's important to acknowledge that minority players, when they go into a locker room, right, they're coming in there with their own experience throughout the entire time of playing in a sport that's majority white. And that's kind of scary, right? And I think Chad can touch on this after a little bit, but like to feel like, you've been the outlier your entire life and to not know where your coach stands with you as a person, right? He might have recruited you as a player because of your skill, but doesn't know where you stand as a person and your background and everything that comes with you outside of lacrosse. So I think it's important for coaches to acknowledge that that's the fact of the matter. And then coaches be allies to that, right? Understand that, checking in on your minority players and the black players in your locker room, right? It might require you to have difficult conversations and might require you to step up to the plate and just ask, like, how are you doing, right? I understand this is different. It might be different. Chad came from down south in Atlanta, right? His experience is going to be mighty different than the kids that are coming from New Jersey and Baltimore and Long Island. And that's fine, right? But it's important to acknowledge that that's what's going on. And then really start to speak about what it means to be an ally and how to do that. And I've always naturally done that because I know my role within my space. And that was easy for me to be an ally for Chad because I'd always been that my entire life. But perhaps, someone on the other side of the locker room who cares about Chad as a person and who cares about people, no matter what the color of their skin, they don't understand how to be an ally. And that's fine. I think that's something we need to talk about. And I think it's the biggest thing in terms of being an ally, both as a coach and a player, right? When you do have black players and minority players in your locker room, which is the fact of the matter in our sport right now, I think you have to start taking on their struggles as your own. And I think what that means is to start recognizing that our experiences are different and that's okay. But how can we put ourselves in their shoes and acknowledge that their experiences are different and how can we meet them where they are? I think another thing is to stand up, for these people, even when you feel scared. Because I think that's the hardest thing is like there are such good men and women in our sport that haven't spoken up for so long because it's a hard conversation to have. And I think that we have to just understand that, like, at the end of the day, we're really looking to, on the team that you're on, you have one common goal in mind. And if you can bring everyone together to achieve that common goal better than before, right, then everyone's going to win. And that's what it is. It's just bringing us together to be able to get to our common goal. And part of that is acknowledging that these players have had a different experience, and how can we be there for you to help you move in the direction that we all want to go in. And at the end of the day, I think the biggest thing is to acknowledge that sometimes, right, it's not about you, right? And I think a lot of the times we make it about ourselves. And I think, again, I can let Chad kind of take this, but like, I knew my experience in the locker room and how it's always been, right? People were looking at me different.
Or did I just lose him?
Jules just froze for a second here.
Chad Toliver, if we can bring you back in here and unmute yourself, because he was throwing you the baton there a little bit. Sort of, if you could tell these coaches or high school players, how to improve or what we need to do better, what would your message be to the room here, so to speak?
Yeah, so my message would be kind of similar to what everyone's been saying. And it was kind of tough for me because growing up in Atlanta, I had to make a decision if I was going to go play football at Wake Forest or play lacrosse at Rutgers. And so playing football, obviously you're with a bunch of guys and some of my best friends who continue to play in the NFL and whatever. When we played in high school and all, they looked like me, right? And so when we had summer workouts and things like that, it was always you were out there with your boys and it didn't really matter. And then when I went to lacrosse tournaments and obviously being kind of the anomaly there, things kind of set in and kind of took place and I didn't really understand things. And when you're that age and you're competing, you sometimes don't really realize that until you get to a point or you're put in a position where you start to realize you're different. And so then when I went to college, obviously at Rutgers, you got a bunch of guys from a different kind of backgrounds. You have some guys who come from wealthy backgrounds, some guys who've been in the locker room, African Americans, some who haven't really spoken, some who haven't really conversed, and it's hard sometimes. But I think the number one thing, and if I can go back and recommend anything to coaches is I would say take a week of just squashing fall ball and take the guys to a cabin or something and have those guys create a bond, right? Have those guys create a bond. And I think that'll only help you on the field because, it was hard for me, at least because, I lived with football players as well in college. And it was just hard for me to understand. And I wanted to relate to them and I wanted to be as cool as I, could possibly be with them. But they were just so different. And some people, they just, like I said earlier, that, you fear what you just don't understand. And instead of having that conversation, I think we were just kind of emotionally immature to where I don't really understand him. And I'm like, I don't really understand you. And we never bridged that gap. So if I can, give advice, I would say take a week of just fall ball, get to know your teammate, step out of the box, step out of your comfort zone, get to know him. And one thing that I would say that kind of made me realize things were different and I was able to spark a conversation with one of my good friends is, I asked him something in particular happened in the locker room, which I won't go into the topic where Jules had to kind of intervene as well. And I asked one of the guys, I was just like, hey, if you guys were me and the roles were reversed and this whole locker room was black, how would you guys feel? And it was kind of just a silent, and it was just silence for a little bit. And it was an understanding where it was like, okay, now I got to start looking, at things different from a different perspective. And that's what we did. And I was able to create some friendships from that. And some people, like I said, were just uncomfortable with that particular topic and didn't want to kind of dive into that and speak about it. And I don't think it was a relationship. I think there were a lot of relationships that were left on the table from it, just because of that ability not to have, the sense to understand one another and just have that conversation with one another. And like I said, Jules, I look at Jules, he was just kind of like my little therapist at one point because he was my locker buddy 2 lockers down. And I would just look at him and just ask him a certain question. And some of the guys didn't even realize Jules was black sometimes. They would say certain things and Jules was like, yo, what are you doing? And that was a hard topic as well. So I would say definitely bridge the gap, step out of your comfort zone. As a coach, take your players somewhere for a week or a couple of days, no phones, nothing, and really let the guys get to know one another, where they come from, and try to create that sense of just understanding one another, because I think that's going to help you on the field. And I think you got essentially going to want to play for one another because now it's comfort, right? It's everyone's comfortable with one another. They're brothers who want to fight for each other on the field. And I think that would be probably, if I could go back and say anything to any of our coaches or advice to the future coaches, is that's one thing I would definitely recommend.
I want to put you on the spot here, and then I have one more question for Britt. But what have you taken out of the last 48 minutes? And if you have a question for someone like Nigel who went through the Ivy League, or Britt who went through the Ivy League, which you are about to, what's the question? What do you think what has sparked you the most after listening to these stories over almost an hour? And what would you like to find out, to maybe make what you're about to do in the fall and go to be a student athlete at Yale a little bit easier?
I would just want to ask, because obviously most Ivy Leagues are pretty similar. So what is, what made it easy or easier for you guys? Obviously, like me, you, Britt, or Nigel, we all come from different backgrounds or whatever it is. But what made being at an Ivy League easier for you, and just something that you learned that just made being at an Ivy League easier for you?
Speaking on me, when I first got there, the upperclassmen, the first week, kind of just took all the freshmen under their wings and kind of explained how Harvard works, both academically and athletically, and how best to balance the two of them. Because at the end of the day, college lacrosse or college sports in general is you're balancing your academic requirements with your athletic requirements. And if you're bad at time management or bad at organizing yourself and being proactive and getting things done on time, you're just not going to succeed both in the classroom and on the field. So the upperclassmen did a great job of proactively reaching out to us and kind of giving us advice on what classes to take and how best to manage our time and things like that, which made the transition to college a lot easier. So I would say reach out to your upperclassmen when you get there and ask them for advice, both academically and athletically. And don't be afraid to ask questions and kind of start to build those relationships early through asking for advice on and off the field.
I would echo a similar tone and say, don't be afraid to also ask for help. That is I don't just see it in minorities on the lacrosse field, but I've also seen it throughout my entire lacrosse career. I went to start off at UVA, then finished my career off at Penn. And asking for help when you need help is so important. And it's really hard as an athlete, especially if you're super competitive and you're used to, getting yourself in shape, finding ways to beat your other teammates to become a starter. It's hard to then say everything's not okay and I need help. And so knowing when you're at that point where you do need to ask for help and finding that teammate or developing that relationship with a coach early on will just allow you to enjoy so many more fun moments rather than some of the really, really tough ones.
Thank you.
Because, you mentioned, you're the only Black person on your desk out of 65 traders, I think was the number you, how has your experience in lacrosse? I know you told a story about, your senior team trip sort of, it's a shame we have to ask this, but helped you deal with that now. I mean, I guess it's not, or unfortunately it's still recurring, but sort of that experience at Penn now in the workforce and the quote unquote real world. What can you take from those experiences? Because I know on the recent call that we had to ask, you mentioned you wish you could handle that differently. So what did you learn from that is now beneficial to you, to use the term real world and business world?
So for me, when I came out of the situation for Penn, I came with pure anger. Any of my teammates would attest with that. I don't think I'd been that angry in my life in a really, really long time. And I struggled on how I was going to deal with it because I fully felt betrayed by people that I was we just went to the Elite Eight. We're trying to go even further. And for me, it was just kind of a gut wrench and I didn't know how to deal with that emotion, and unfortunately didn't deal with it in the best way. Thankfully, my teammates and I were able to get through it before the end of the season, very much so to my coaches facilitating the conversation, as well as giving me an outlet, sort of being my therapist at the time when I needed them to understand that I was just sick and tired of dealing with this on and on throughout my entire life, starting in docs when I was in 5th grade all the way through, of just being the only individual. And learning how to not use that anger, and instead finding outlets to talk to individuals, talk to some of my best friends and say, this is what I'm angry about. I just need you to hear me out for a second, and then help me come up with a way to have the conversation with so-and-so has definitely changed the way I handle things in the workplace. So for example, we have a call at my company every Wednesday. It's probably close to 100 to 150 people on the call. And I felt like I had to say something about what's going on in the world. No one Monday and Tuesday reached out to me. And finally we got to the Wednesday call and I knew I had to say something. I knew that I couldn't look at the next Britt Brown or whoever down the line who would join us and try and make it as a trader and say that I sat there silent and didn't say anything. And so I said it as eloquently as I possibly could, trying to show that I'm not trying to push anyone in a box. I'm not trying to make this about politics. I'm trying to bring people to the table to have the conversation, and reaching across to break the ice, because maybe they felt too uncomfortable as a white man in the corporate world to reach out to a 25-year-old Black woman on the desk. And that sometimes is the unfortunate case in the US right now, and quite frankly, in a lot of places around the world. And so I took it upon myself after I presented a few bonds we wanted to sell that let's talk about this. And I have something to say and we need to do better. We need to have these conversations. We need to educate each other. When I get angry on the desk, it should be the same reaction when a white peer gets angry. I shouldn't be seen as aggressive because I'm a Black woman on the desk getting angry over a trade. Other people get angry over a trade too. The reaction should be the same. And after that discussion, I had people across the company, even outside of my group, say thank you, and say thank you for stepping up. Thank you for breaking the ice. Thank you for having the guts to do it. And now how do we help? How do we have that discussion with our kids? How do we have a discussion with our neighbors? How do we have a discussion with our parents? And I think while we bounce all these ideas off of each other, that's where the discussion starts. And so for me, breaking that ice would have never been able to happen if I didn't have the experience at Penn. If I didn't know that just coming from pure anger and accusation, and just targeting people instead of trying to find a way to have a conversation, there's no way I would have had that discussion. There's no way I would have been promoted as quickly as I was. And there's no way I'd be helping actually another Penn athlete, another Penn alum trade the book we are right now. And so for me, I'm forever grateful for that experience. Forever, even though it was, definitely a very trying time.
Week, I'm sure we've all read many different articles and columns from players and former coaches that all have the same message. Sport needs to become more diverse. We need to create more programs. We need more people of color playing the sport of lacrosse. Kayla Trainer, the great player from Syracuse, who now is an assistant coach at Boston College, wrote that, I read today. So Matt, I want to bring you back in for the last word, because we all can sit here. We all know the sport needs to be more diverse. We also know it's a very expensive sport to play because of equipment, and it's very tough to create programs. So I want to give you, Matt, the last word here with a question from the audience. And is, in light of the current events, what are some things we can do to stay connected to lacrosse organizations such as CityLax, Harlem Lacrosse, Oakland Lacrosse? Matt, how important is it for the fans of the lacrosse community, not the up-and-coming players, but the fans and the people who have played and taken so much from this game, to know more and help more with CityLax and the other organizations that are doing great work across this country?
Great question. We, as an organization that goes back 14 now, almost 15 years, have benefited tremendously by the support we get from people who want to roll up their sleeves and volunteer with us. Former lacrosse players especially, but we have a very strong advisory group and a very strong board of directors, and very passionate. we have a junior advisory board that has been instrumental in helping us make better connections with the student athletes by what they do with them in our clinics. And if you go to the CityLax website, you'll see a section that says, click on volunteer, and that gives you all the different options that we have for somebody who's interested, whether you're just coming out of college or somebody who's been around lacrosse like I have for decades. We need hands. It's, you know, a big sport that the sport that we have and the number of kids that we could potentially serve can always use a volunteer or groups of volunteers. The other way is obviously to get involved with us in your community. If you have a community like we've had a number of years ago, some of our work was noticed by a community in Bergen County, New Jersey, and we connected with them. It was the one of the high school teams there, and they came to a clinic just to observe, and I think that really connected them to what we were trying to do on the field, meet the kids, meet our volunteers. The next thing I knew, I had 8 to 10 high school players coming in every Sunday in the winter to mentor and work with our kids on the field, even though they were high school to high school age. Parents shuttled them in, and the parent group there was tremendous. Some of them, one or two of them even were on our advisory board for a while. So there are many avenues that people can connect with us, and we're open to suggestions and discussions, of course, with anybody who's interested. And let me just say, Eamon, there are other groups, and CityLax probably pioneered working with urban kids in lacrosse in New York City. There are other groups like Bronx Lacrosse and Harlem Lacrosse that are doing tremendous work. Sure they could use the help too, but try to dial us up first if you can.
Well, we just got a comment from someone watching this. Harrison says, a poignant and overdue conversation. We need more of these. Thank you, panelists, Matt and CityLax. So I don't think there's any better than that. Would like to thank CityLax, Matt and John for organizing this, and of course our panelists for dedicating their time. Jules, Nigel, Carter, Britt, Chad, and Jonathan. Thank you very much for joining us and sharing stories and your experiences. We thank so much of you. So many of you joined us on the Zoom call. We hope it was beneficial and worth your time. It certainly was to me. And again, you see the website there if you want to learn more about CityLax and how you can help, citylax.org. You can also follow us all over social media. And if you happen to be watching, you're a senior college player who's not going back to college, as Nigel mentioned at the top of the show, remember that we are having the CityLax Senior Classic in the fall, so you can find out how to sign up for that game if your career was cut short due to the pandemic. Once again, I'm Eamon McAnaney. I'd like to thank all our panelists, Nigel Andrews for organizing this as well. Thank you so much for listening, and enjoy your summer and follow us on social media. Thank you very much, and good night.
Thanks, Eamon. I just want to say to everybody, this will not be the last one of these. We're going to do more of these. I was so thrilled with everyone on this call. So stay tuned. If you thought this conversation needs to keep going, we agree. So we're going to be doing more of these, and so stay tuned. We'll be letting you know when the next one happens. So thank you all. Panelists, knocked it out of the park. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
You all, guys.
Thanks. Goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you.